This is part of a series of videos on key components in the Mythic Game Master emulator system. Mythic GME is a system designed to allow you to play a tabletop RPG by yourself or with the group without the need for a dedicated game master. In the last entry, we talked about the fate chart and asking fate questions. And in this entry, we're going to talk about the concept of scenes and introduce the chaos factor. When we looked at the fate chart and only considering the odds section and the central column, we had enough to run interesting campaigns. But things can get more interesting when we add this chaos factor. Before we can really talk much about the chaos factor, we need to first talk about scenes. Scenes are the main organizational unit of stories, and what exactly the definition of the beginning and end of a scene can be a bit subjective. I have a feel for what I like to use. The Mythic books talk about interest as one of the scene strategies in a section that is probably worth reading. Before I go into a scene, I try to imagine what the scene is mostly about, and then that gives me a good idea of when the scene would be over. For example, if I envision a scene as a character exploring a room, then the scene is over when I'm done and leave that room. If the scene is a conversation with an NPC, then once we move on from the conversation, it's time for a new scene. I prefer theme-based scenes like this to other potential strategies, such as time-based scenes. I don't want to have a new scene every 5 minutes, regardless of what's going on in the fiction, but I suppose there might be some games or contexts where something like that may be helpful. You'll have to play with different scene strategies to see what works for you, but what matters most for this is that scene transitions are the cue to do certain housekeeping tasks. At the end of each scene, there are a few housekeeping items to attend to. Right now, we'll only concern ourselves with moving the chaos factor, but later we'll see that there are other things. Let's look again at this fate chart. There's a highlighted column and a highlighted row. That highlighted column gives us the percentage chance for any given odds when the chaos factor is 5, which is the default. The highlighted row gives us the percentage chances for a 50-50 question for any chaos factor. And if you aren't playing with the chaos factor, you should assume that the chaos factor is 5, and if you don't know the odds, you should assume that the odds are 50-50. The chaos factor is a number from 1 through 9 that has a good impact on the feel of the game. A higher chaos factor translates into more yes answers. As we'll see later, it also means more random events and other departures from our expectations, but we'll cover those issues later. A lower chaos factor means the opposite, less yes answers and less random events and unexpected scenes. For example, in the last entry, we considered the question about whether or not a given magic shop had an invisibility potion for sale. We figured that such a thing is not unheard of, but there's certainly no guarantee, and settled on odds of unlikely. Then the chaos factor was 5. This meant that a yes or no question, which was deemed unlikely, had a 35% chance of being true. But the chaos factor changes things. If the chaos factor was 7, that very same question now has a 60% chance of being true. And if it was 3, the same question has only a 15% chance. The chaos factor is adjusted by 1 at the end of each scene, either up or down. So, since the first scene has a chaos factor of 5, the chaos factor for the second scene will either be 4 or 6. How to decide which direction to move the chaos factor at the end of a scene is one of the few areas in which I personally prefer to depart from Mythic's default rules. The default rule is to ask at the end of a scene whether the player character or characters were more or less in control of the situation during that scene. If the player was more in control, you would lower the chaos factor by 1, otherwise you increase it by 1. This can sometimes have the effect of the situation spiraling out of control. A high chaos factor can lead to things getting out of hand, which in turn pushes the chaos factor even higher. I don't like to use that method for every scene. I sometimes use it when the scene was particularly impactful. If things are wildly out of the character's control, and I think that the momentum should continue, I'll increase the chaos factor. And I will do the inverse if the character very clearly sees control of the situation. Most of the time, however, I randomize the chaos factor by rolling a d10 and moving the chaos factor by 1 in the direction of that result. So if I roll higher than the current chaos factor, I increase it, and if I roll lower, then I decrease it. If the rolled value equals the chaos factor, I'm personally okay with leaving the chaos factor at that value, but the Mythic book suggestion is to decrease it. Either way, this method has the effect of allowing the chaos factor to drift a good bit, but keeps it with a tendency to stay near a center value of 5 most of the time. Although at other times I won't even roll or think about character control. I might know, based on the state of the game, that I need to increase or decrease the level of chaos going on in the game. So far, the only thing that we've seen which will be influenced by this chaos factor is how often we get yes answers when asking a fate question, but there are others. So next entry, we will prepare to understand Mythic random events by considering meaning tables.